South Africa, the gold land, the motherland, the country that everyone wants to be at. Fantastic place. The landscape, it's unbelievable. That's why most Africans love to visit South Africa, including Nigerians. But did you know that young South Africans have this particular perception about Nigerians living in South Africa? Want to know what the perceptions are? Let's find out.
When we listen to this podcast about girls who share their experiences with Nigerian men, it's very scary. And I have been very wary of Nigerian men. I'm scared of Nigerian men. I don't know why. Because you would hear stories such as like, no, they come here, they sleep with you to get your luck, they feed on your luck, you never be anything in life. They have snakes apparently. So, and I'm someone who's scared of snakes, so I can't risk that. So I think my perspective on Nigerian guys is mostly based on what people had to say. I've never had a one-on-one encounter with a Nigerian person, either a girl or a boy.
So I would say that people that you see on the street and the people that you come to live together with and learn from are two different people. Like there is to life, the good and bad. And we just happen to have the bad apples from Nigeria tainting the good image that the people of Nigeria have established for themselves.
There are people that South Africans blame for everything that's going wrong. There's unemployment, they will say Nigerians are taking jobs. There's drugs, they will say Nigerians are selling drugs. There's crime, they will blame it on Nigerians. When something is done by a Nigerian, it's reported widely, because even a South African can be caught abroad selling drugs. Our media won't report it like that.
I think they are the most talkative people. They talk a lot, to be honest. You will try to get one idea across your mind, then the next thing they talk about something else. So I feel like they are so talkative and they are so smart. One thing about our Nigerian brothers is that they are very smart and and also business-minded people as well.
The crime that are committed by Nigerian people in our country, they're always through South African people, because these people, they know the streets of our country. So it's unfortunate that I have to go against everyone and say we have to deal with our people first, because every crime through that is done by Nigeria, done by people from African countries and like outside our continent as well, they are true South African people.
What an interesting perspective from the young South Africans giving their opinions about Nigerians living in their country. But a section of the professionals have something a little different. They put some context to it.
And there are things that fuel, what I call unfair xenophobia and hatred, where people think that the whole crime in South Africa is only committed by Zimbabweans. Drugs are only peddled by Nigerians, and cash heists are done by Mozambicans. There are South Africans who are also part of those criminal networks. But these are things that contribute to, the straining of relationships. These are things that continue to say there'll always be this tense relationship between the two countries. But I think what the two governments need to really look at and urgently address is from the societal point of view, not the diplomatic one, but the intercultural and intersocietal of how the two nations can relate with one another. They are two of Africa's biggest superpowers, but let's not lie to each other. There are underlying issues, and those need to be spoken about, and that can only be led from a civil society level.
I find them very admirable, hardworking, very dedicated, disciplined people, which are sentiments that I also echo, perceptions I also echo. But I think when it comes to the ground and local communities, there's perceptions about them being involved in selling drugs and all those social ills that are associated with society. So I think it depends on where you find a particular Nigeria, in which community in South Africa you find them and what you find them doing for a living. One of the things that fuels negative perceptions around them is that social media tends to focus on one angle of Nigerians. Yes, we know in all contexts, there's good people, there's bad people that are involved in different things. But you'd find that because social media is all about promoting things that create conversations and are popular, you find that most of the time the negative side of Nigerians are the ones, the viewpoints that are present in the media that get people talking and that people talk.
You know, most South Africans, you know, don't have any negative feelings against Nigerians. Obviously, there is a tug of war between these superpowers because Nigeria and South Africa are two big countries in Africa, and obviously because of that, you tend to see that there's a lot of friction that often happens, sometimes political, geopolitical positioning, but it doesn't mean that the ordinary South African has got any negative feelings. Yes, cases can be raised around maybe the issue of Chidima, where people were talking about so many other things online, but generally the ordinary person is of the understanding that we are all Africans, we deserve to live in the same continent.
Members of the MTN Media Innovation Program while in South Africa expressed concerns about the strained relationship between the two nations.
We're here at the South African Institute for International Affairs.
So the narration in Nigeria is that South Africans hate Nigerians, and the narration in South Africa is that Nigerians are mostly criminals fighting for their already scarce resources, but this is not entirely true.
The lectures we got today was not inspiring. It was depressing for me because Africa has a myriad of challenges and problems. Fighting each other shouldn't be one of those problems.
The xenophobic attacks on Nigerians. And from our conversation, I found out that it could be that there are some people benefiting from this, right? And it doesn't really speak well because it's sort of selfish.
But what I saw today is that South Africans are sort of giving up hope that nothing can be done. Nigerian who has lived most of his life in South Africa, he tells me the hate doesn't really exist, it's just a perception.
And the xenophobic tensions in South Africa and between South Africa and Nigeria are really just boiling down to perceptions. It's strictly a perception issue, and perceptions are driven and drawn by narratives. And these narratives need to be corrected, they need to be fact-checked, and they also need to be very much, authenticated.
Even the South African statistics don't show that most crimes committed in South Africa are done by Nigerians.
The successes attained by the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, DPCI, during the first quarter of 2024-2025 financial year. During this period, the Directorate secured convictions on 506 accused. Of these convictions, 262 accused persons, inclusive of 12 juristic persons, were sentenced, while the balance of 244, which include 15 juristic persons, are to be sentenced on the dates after this quarter under review. One of the 262 sentenced natural persons, 173 are South Africans, while 77 are foreign nationals. The top sentenced foreign nationals are 27 Zimbabweans, Lesotho with 14 convicts, Mozambique with 10 convicts. The rest are divided among the other countries. Most of these convictions and sentences were secured in the Northwest Province with 51.
During a discussion with Stephen Grust of the South African Institute of International Affairs, he tried to trace the history of the two countries' diplomatic role as far back as 1995.
So I know I'm not doing this in a historical order, but if you think back to 1995, when Sani Abacha was the president of Nigeria, and there was the big case of the Ogoni activists, including Ken Saro-Wiwa. Mandela believed that he had been given assurances that they would not be executed. He went to the Commonwealth Summit in Auckland in New Zealand, and while he was there, Abacha put Saro-Wiwa and 8 others to death. And Mandela was devastated, very angry, and moved in 1995 for Nigeria's suspension from the Commonwealth. That didn't go down well. And in fact, he had to backtrack, and South Africa learned a lesson that they should not be too far out of step with what Africa is doing, and it's not good to embarrass another African country in public. And I think that's had an effect. Maybe good because it's increased intra-African solidarity and Pan-Africanism, but I think it's also made South Africa very wary of criticizing other countries.
He also mentioned that it has taken South Africa a long time to even acknowledge the problem.
It's taken a long time for the South African government to recognize and accept that xenophobia is a problem. I mean, I work on the African peer review mechanism, and it was the 15th anniversary of the establishment of the mechanism, and President Thabo Mbeki was at the event, and I asked a very pertinent question. I said, when the peer review mechanism examined South Africa in 2007, it identified latent xenophobia and said this is a phenomenon that must be nipped in the bud and must be taken seriously. Mr. President, do you wish that if you went back all those years, you would have taken it a little bit more seriously? And he said, I'm not going to answer your question. And then he proceeded to answer my question for an hour. But he said, you know, a lot of it is just criminals taking advantage of this, and it's not really a problem. And the Zambian ambassador stood up and said, Mr. President, with respect, and you know when somebody says, with respect, what's coming next? He said, you know, my nationals are really suffering here. There have been people killed. There have been businesses destroyed. There have been homes destroyed. So I think it's taken a long time for the government to actually acknowledge it's a problem.
Former President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa thinks the conversation on Pan-Africanism has completely lost steam.
And so when you raise this matter about the movement of Africans among themselves, you are talking to people who no longer have that very strong sense of a Pan-African common belonging. It's a problem. We discussed this question in this country about the rules and regulations this country has with regard to other people, Africans in the first instance. It's a battle to convince the people who actually practically handle this thing every day to say, but you need a system which encourages interaction among the Africans, not to exclude people, but to include. So it's related, I'm saying, to the politically what has happened on the continent is a regression from the kind of Pan-Africanist commitment that you have with other earlier leaders. You know, the part of the problem that I see is a decline in commitment to a Pan-Africanist view. That sense of a strong Pan-Africanism among our political leadership is kind of receded.
Members of MT and MIP have some action plans.
You know, so if we keep feeding this narrative, if we keep keying into people's perception of both countries, we are not going to solve this problem. So how do we solve the problem? Let's amplify the good things about both countries. Let's amplify the best of both worlds.
And one of the things that stood out for me is the fact that we need to push out more positive stories of international relations, right? I mean, a lot of things are happening which are on the negative side, but there are positive stories that can be pushed out.
So I really believe that if we work together, if we look at the positive sides of both countries, it's really going to help us, and we stop wasting time on things that separate us. Rather, we'll build ourselves and we become a better country together.
But I also went away with the fact that the role of the media in bridging this gap cannot be understated. So for us as the media in Nigeria, I have been challenged to make sure I partner other African journalists to tell the right narratives about Africa for Africa to the globe.
The chairman of MTN Group, Sebisi Jonas, echoed how the world has so much changed over time, reiterating what exactly people are more concerned about right now.
So people are increasingly looking at politicians differently now. The world is moving in a more pragmatic space where it is about how the economy gets strong, how do we ensure inclusivity, how do we ensure the youth have jobs, and how do we ensure that there's greater trade, etc. So it's becoming more focused on practical stuff as opposed to ideological stuff. I mean, and any politician that comes back to you and say, I'm ideological, you must know they are lying.
Now we know where that skewed narrative comes from. Social media, an isolated case blown out of proportion, and a particular section of the society, that's the political class, trying to use closed borders as a means to push narratives that are so wrong. Well, so when next you hear these narratives, show them this video at least, and maybe put it in context. There's unity in diversity, as a matter of fact, and it's about time to rebuild Africa, not to destroy. Thanks for watching.